So you want your boy to do more reading. Maybe it's time to get real. Could be they're bored by video games and movie fantasies, fables and fairy stories. When it comes to books, not all boys are wild about Harry. Perhaps they're pining after real people, real adventures.
The girls will read anything. Boys won't.
Our job is to acquire the books, edit the books, design the books.
Steve Hill and Peggy Hogan are children book publishing veterans who founded Boston-based Flying Point Press. They've teamed up with Barnes and Noble on Sterling Point Books, a reissue of a long out-of-print series of nonfiction books for boys that was dear to the boyhood heart of Steve Hill.
When I was young, I was a huge reader of history books for kids, and I had a collection of books that were called landmark books. And these were very popular back in the 50s and 60s.
There are histories and biographies of real-life adventurers and warriors by top-flight authors. The 50-year-old landmark biography of Daniel Boone might seem old-fashioned to a 21st century boy, but here it is, repackaged as a Sterling Point edition. This biography of General George Patton is Steve Hill's own copy of the landmark original. Here's the Sterling Point version: big guns, bright colors. In the early 1950s, publishing legend Bennett Cerf founded the original landmark series when he couldn't find any good nonfiction books for his own 8-year-old boy. They sold millions and were read by, among others, the boy who grew up to give us Star Wars.
George Lucas, the filmmaker, who said that he really developed his love of history and his love of reading by reading these very same landmark books.
Now you will experience the full power of the dark side.
Boys might be discouraged from reading just because they think it's, it's not a cool thing to do. It's not very masculine. But they probably wouldn't mind having this in their book bag about the Barbary pirates. And no one's going to call them a sissy if they're reading about old blood and guts. Landmark books eventually disappeared, a victim of publishing trends.
There are a lot of women in the children's book industry. I think it's basically they feel that books for boys just are not as strong sellers as books for girls, and so they follow those trends.
But Peggy Hogan says books for boys can be good books for girls too, like Sterling Point biographies of Indian guide Sacagawea and aviation pioneer Amelia Earhart.
I used to like to read the books that the boys would read. I was reading anything that was an adventure story, a survival story.
Anita Sylvie is an author, critic, and authority on children's books.
I can't tell you the number of parents who say to me, my son isn't reading. All he ever reads is information. Sports tables, timetables for trains, information books, information articles. When will I get him to read? And of course, if you're reading information, you're reading.
Take Flying Point's reissued biography of naval legend John Paul Jones, full of history and information.
We've got the sails all labeled and numbered, and we've got charts in here so that you can see that what the jobs aboard ship are, the commands. Anything like that will kind of make a book more appealing to a boy, and they can get into the job of actually managing a ship if they can see what see what a midshipman would have been learning.
Now Steve Hill and Peggy Hogan are teaming up with the Major League Baseball Players Association on another series of books for boys, biographies of contemporary baseball players.
We've got a great author, Glenn Stout, who's written a tremendous number of books about baseball.
You don't get to the major leagues without working real hard and without having some help along the way from your parents or from your coaches, and really doing the hard work. David Ortiz, for example, how much work he must have done in order to get where he is today. And we think that those stories need telling.
Big Papi, side by side with Teddy Roosevelt and Lawrence of Arabia. Sounds like a home run. Greg Wayland, NECN.